Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Football Friday Tailgate Show. I'm your host, Kadin Pounders, and we're glad you could join us here tonight on WGOL. We got a bit of a shorter show, I think, for you tonight. Had a coach interview lined up that kind of fell through at the last moment. So just three segments for you here tonight. Of course, I'm going to talk about all the high school football action happening here in Franklin County this evening. And later on, in the next segment, we'll have Luke Shepard, L.A. Shepard, come on and give his weekly locks of the week of the college football games if you're one of those bettors out there. And then in the third and final segment, me and Luke's going to stay on, and we're going to talk about some of the college football action happening this weekend on Saturday. Quite a few good football games going on tomorrow. So stick around for that segment. Stick through the rest of the show, and hopefully we got another pretty good one for you tonight. Just keep in mind, after the tailgate show is over, we'll have the Coach Dustin Goodwin show here on WGOL. And following that, me and Ty Wells will bring you the action from Golden Tiger Stadium tonight as the Russellville Golden Tigers take on region rival East Limestone. So Golden Tigers going into that one 1-2 and 1-0 in the region. Of course, we'll get to them. But first, we're going to start off with, we got 4 teams in action tonight in Franklin County, and we got 2 teams that are on a bye week. We'll start with the 2 teams that are on the bye week. That's Belgreen and Tharptown. These 2 teams played each other last week. Belgreen played in their first homecoming game last week, got a 34-0 win over Tharptown. Great game by Belgreen. Scored on all but one possession in that game. Tharptown, as we've talked about, still struggling under first-year head coach Brian White, but have seen some improvement from the Wildcats from week to week. But the main story here, last week was Belgreen first football homecoming. The last undefeated team in Franklin County, sitting at 3-0 this year. So really interesting to see, what the Bulldogs are doing over there at Belgreen. Next week, the Belgreen Bulldogs are going to be back in action. They're going to travel to Tanner, their second road game this season. That's a game that Belgreen lost last year, but so far Belgreen's kind of turned everything around. Teams they lost to last year, they're beating, and the teams that they beat last year, they're beating by even more. So, great job with Coach Jonathan Raper over there at Belgreen. He's really doing some marvelous things with that program. Only in its second year, keep in mind. Only in its second year. Still not technically a varsity program. Still technically a JV program, but they are playing. All their opponents are against varsity teams. Going to play Vina later this year. So keep an eye on the Bulldogs. Like I said, that was their first shutout in program history, beating Tharptown 30-4-0, and they're still the only unbeaten team in Franklin County at 3-0. Next week, Tharptown is going to host region opponent Decatur Heritage. So Wildcats going to get a home game next week. So if you're a Tharptown fan, be sure to go out there and support the Wildcats. Let's look at the 4 teams that are in action this week. We'll start with the Phil Campbell Bobcats, who are 0-2 and 0-1 in the region. Last week, Phil Campbell was on the road at Vinemont, a region opponent. They lost that game 22-16 in maybe a bit of controversial fashion. Talking to Coach Jacob Hamilton last week, he was not super happy about some of the penalties that were called on Phil Campbell. Those penalties kind of changed the game. But there were some good takeaways from that game, even though it was a loss on the road. Like I said, it was 22-16. Had a chance there at the end to potentially win the game. Penalties kind of killed that drive. Had 3 penalties back to back that really killed it. And then there was a couple turnovers, but there were some good things. If you're a Phil Campbell fan, 2 good takeaways. The defense played very well. That was one thing that Coach Jacob Hamilton was very clear about. He was very proud of the defensive performance that he saw last week. Only gave up 2 touchdowns. The third touchdown for Vinemont was a kickoff return for a touchdown, which was kind of like a swing of momentum for Vinemont in that game. So without that, could have really gone either way. Phil Campbell had a 16-14 lead at one point. So defense played very well. Offense, like I said, there were some setbacks due to the penalties, and but if you looked at some of the stats in that game, quarterback Hastings Scott had a good game. There were 4 or 5 receivers with catches. Running backs, the running game did well. Scott was one of those that had a good night using his feet to make plays. So I think if you're Phil Campbell and you clean up some of the penalties, which if you're Jacob Hamilton, he's saying, I don't think there were that many penalties really on us. You take those away and clean up some of the turnovers, then that's a game that potentially Phil Campbell wins, and you're sitting at, instead of 0-2 and 0-1 in the region, you're sitting at 1-1 and 1-0 in the region. That's just a few points away, a touchdown drive away from doing that. Don't give up that. Don't give up that special teams touchdown. Your defense is playing really well. Who's to say that they didn't stop them on that drive? So if you're Phil Campbell, you obviously a defeat's never good, but you look at that game and say, hey, we had a chance to win that game. Maybe if one or two other things go our way, we do win that football game. So that's what you can take away from last week's game. But going into this week's game, you're playing against against Oakman, another region opponent who is going to be a little bit tougher test than Vinemont. Last season, Oakman beat Phil Campbell 28-0. That was the only previous meeting between these two teams. Based on Oakman's record and its opponents so far, and the result from last year, I think Oakman, who is traveling to Phil Campbell, first home game of the season for Phil Campbell, I think Oakman probably walks in as the favorites in this game. But as I said, Phil Campbell's defense has shown up this year, and they'll come into this game with some confidence. Phil Campbell's offense clearly has. They have that much more balanced approach that Coach Jacob Hamilton wanted to see from his team this year, and that's been apparent. Just looking at the stats and looking at the numbers, total rushes versus total pass attempts, passing yards versus rushing yards. They're a much more balanced team than they were last year. Much more, closer to 50-50 in that, which, in my mind, generally, if you have a more balanced team, you have, more ways, obviously, to attack your opponent, and your opponent has to respect both attacking types. They can't just try to stop the run and not worry about the pass, or vice versa. They have to stop both, and that obviously gives your team the ability to attack the opponent in different ways. So I think this would be a very good win, obviously, if Phil Campbell can pull it off. Like I said, I think they probably are. They probably come into it as a little bit of an underdog, but it'll be great to see Phil Campbell get into the win column and get to 500 in the region tonight if they can beat Oakman. Next week, Phil Campbell will travel to Winfield for its next Class 3A Region 5 matchup. Let's move on to Red Bay. Red Bay comes into tonight's game against Winston County, 1-1. This will be their first region game of the year. Last week, Red Bay was defeated by University Charter 30-7. That game, if you read my preview last week, that's one that I would take back, obviously. I thought Red Bay would come in there and win that game, based on what they did in week 1 and considering what the score was last year. But I was totally wrong with that game. University Charter came out and won that decisively. But looking at this week, Red Bay can get back on track, get back into their winning ways. They hold an 11-5 and 1 all-time series advantage over Winston County. But the last few years it's been Winston County's series. The Yellow Jackets won last year 51-8 and snapped a 4-game winning streak by the Tigers over that team. They've met the playoffs twice. Red Bay getting the better of Winston County both in those, but this is the 10th meeting between these teams as members of the same region, and Red Bay holds the series in that region. That region series, they hold the advantage. So, what can you say about Red Bay? Week 1, scored a lot of points, 41 points. Defense played really well and gave up 6 points. University Charter is one of those. It's technically a charter school, but private school. So who's to say what kind of athletes they had on that team? But after getting that week 1 win against Lamar County, a blowout win. That is, Red Bay started the Tyler Jeffries' era off with a bang. They're back at home tonight at Fred Bostic Jr. Stadium. I'm sure there'll be plenty of fans out there to support the Tigers tonight. This is going to be a tough one, no doubt, for Red Bay. Winston County is the defending region champion, averaging 39 points per game this year. So they're going to have a pretty good offense, but if you look at some of their opponents over the last couple of weeks, they not score a lot, but they also give up a lot of points. So if Red Bay's offense is clicking like it was in Week 1 against Lamar County, you got Jeremiah Thorne back there, an experienced quarterback throwing the ball, Jackson Vincent, senior running back, who we all know, if you've been keeping up with that team, just how athletic and impressive he is. 1,000-yard rusher last season. He's well on his way to that again this year. So if and Red Bay's defense has played pretty well, especially like in that Week 1 game. So if we can see kind of more of that same Red Bay team that we saw in Week 1, who's to say they can't beat Winston County? Like I said, it will be a tough contest going up against the Yellow Jackets, but I think it's going to be a matter of, can they put up the firepower? Can they put up 35, 40, 45 points to beat this Winston County team? I think that's probably what it's going to have to take to beat them. But we will see. I have been wrong already this season plenty of times. So just take that for what it's worth. But good luck to Red Bay tonight against Winston County. Should be a good matchup. And like I said, Red Bay's first region game, so it would be a good start for them if they can get their region play started off with a W. Next week, the Tigers will continue region play, and they're going to be hosting the Lexington Bears. Next up, we've got Russellville. Russellville's 1-2, 1-0 coming in this game. Their last home game before a long road stretch. I think 3 or 4 games on the road after this. They're going to be hosting the East Limestone Indians. Last time out, Russellville defeated Lawrence County 35-6. Their first overall win, first region win for the Golden Tigers. An impressive performance by RHS. Came out right at the gate. The first drive, they drove right down the field and came up short, turned it over on a 4th and 1 or 2. Just kind of bad luck. Unblocked safety came up and made that play and stuffed it. But basically it was all Russellville after that. Scored on every other offensive possession of the first half, I believe. Didn't have to punt until the second half. And then really in the second half, and to be fair, Lawrence County's quarterback went out of the game right before halftime. I believe the news reports said that he had dislocated his shoulder, so he'll be out for a few weeks. But hope he gets to being healthy again here soon. But you have to keep that in mind. Lawrence County was playing with a freshman quarterback all the second half. I think they probably ran 95% of the plays after that. Only maybe 2 or 3 pass plays in the second half. Ate up a lot of clock. I don't know if that was because the coaching staff at Lawrence County decided they wanted to keep it respectable. It was 28-0 at halftime. Russell had scored a touchdown, I believe, in the midway through the fourth quarter, with backups, I believe. But I think maybe Lawrence County probably just wanted to keep it respectable with a freshman quarterback in there. They already had a freshman running back, kind of a young team too in that regard on offense. So they ran the ball a lot. They were successful running the ball. Maybe Russell didn't expect them to just run it that much. Ended up getting a touchdown in garbage time. But a good win for Russellville last week. Coach Goodwin talked about how they really played well in every aspect of the game, and to get that W, and obviously getting a win finally comes with a boost in confidence. So Russellville's going to come into this game confident. They know they can score, know they can hold offenses to a few points. Last week's game was kind of Russellville had a good game against Dexter coming out, and I think they kind of showed more of that last week against Lawrence County. Against East Limestone tonight, not a great team, to be fair. Haven't been a great team for a while. If you just look at what Russellville has done against East Limestone the last few years, last 3 matchups, Russellville scored over 50 points against this team. Scored 40 4 years ago. Let's see, East Limestone's only won 2 games against the Golden Tigers. That was in 2011 and 2014. So been a while since East Limestone has beaten Russellville, even though they played every year for the last 15 years. So I I expect if you're a Russellville fan, you think you can expect maybe a duplicate performance, or you want to maybe duplicate your performance from last week against Lawrence County. Quarterback Wick Gowen has done a great job throwing the ball this year, and last week Russell was able to get the running game going against Lawrence County. Junior running back Taurus Davis had 2 rushing touchdowns, rushed for over 150 yards, I believe. Devin Morris had a touchdown run. Bryson Cooper, who's a receiver who we've called out a few times, but he got his first 2 receiving touchdowns of the year last week. So just an overall great performance from the Russellville offense. And then on defense, some of the same guys we've always talked about all year, like Kiefer Hallmark and Malachi Gross. Malachi Gross had a interception in that game last week. We had a few younger guys come into the game and make an impact, especially there late. So special teams did a great job, 5 of 5 extra points in that game against Lawrence County. So overall, just a great game from Russellville, and they'll want to duplicate that tonight against East Limestone. Next week, RHS is going to travel to Ardmore. Like I said, the first of a long stretch of road matchup. That one will definitely, I think, be tougher than the last 2 matchups last year. Ardmore gave Russellville a battle. That's usually Ardmore is one of those bigger teams, more physical teams. Maybe not as fast or as skilled, but bigger and more physical. So we'll see what Russellville can do next week on the road for the first time in a couple weeks at Ardmore. And like I said, that will be the first, I think, 3 or 4 straight road games for Russellville. So if you're not at the Golden Tiger Stadium tonight, it will be the last time for a while you get to see the Golden Tigers at home. All right, and then to wrap up, we're going to go to Vina. Vina 0-2, 0-1 in the region. They're going to play at Shoals Christian tonight. Shoals Christian comes in 0-3, 0-1 in the region. Last time Vina was toppled by Phillips 26-12, a game that Vina had won last year. But Phillips comes back on top and beats Phillips. Phillips came back on top last week and beat Vina. So Vina, like I said, started 0-2 after that winning season last year. Not looking great for the Red Devils thus far this season. To be entirely frank, I think this is going to be the easiest game that Vina has left on its schedule. Shoals Christian's not a good football team. Finished bottom of the region last year. Looks like they're going to finish bottom of the region this year, just based on the scores and the score lines I've seen from Shoals Christian. Shoals Christian was beaten by Belgreen, blown out by Belgreen in week 1. This is definitely probably the most beatable team that Vina has left on their schedule. So if you're the Red Devils, you really want to go out there and use this game, obviously to get a win on the board, but to really clean up and really get some momentum going for the last 2/3 of the schedule. So Vina, we've talked about in the past few weeks, obviously going to have some difficulties replacing all the guys they had last year. There was, as Coach Cody Renfro said multiple times, there was optimism and momentum going into this year, but so far it hasn't worked out super well yet. But this game could be the one that can get the Red Devils back on track against a kind of a bottom feeder Shoals Christian team. So good luck to the Red Devils tonight. Hopefully they can get back on track. Next week they'll be hosting region opponent Cherokee, so that will be a very big game for the Red Devils at home. So, but really need to get the season going and get a win on the board this week against Shoals Christian. That game is on the road in Florence at Flame Field. All right, that's our wrap-up of everything going on in high school football this week. Tonight, in our next segment, we're going to have Luke Shepard on, Lucas L.A. Shepard. He's going to give us his locks of the week. And then in the third segment, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the college football action happening this weekend. You're listening to the Football Friday Tailgate Show here on WGOL. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Football Friday Tailgate Show. My name is Kadin Pounders, and I am joined in this segment by L.A. Shepard. He's going to give us his locks of the week. Luke, what games do you have this week, and what should our bettors be looking for?
Well, first of all, let me be very honest and say that last week was rough for me. out of the 5 games, had an abysmal record of 2-3. Um, Trust me, I was not happy with my bank account after either. So, um, but overall, for the 2 weeks that we've been picking 6-4 overall, which is about par for the course for someone who knows at least a little bit about what they're talking about. But moving on and getting into our first game, I like. It's an early game, 11 o'clock in the morning. Clemson at Georgia Tech. Clemson is a 2.5 point favorite. I think this is a little bit of an over dramatic line against Clemson here. I think it's because you saw them struggle with Troy. So I think there was some motivation to maybe kind of lean Georgia Tech in this game. But I'm not buying it. I'm gonna take Clemson to cover that game and and win that game by probably double digits. I would say a 10 point victory.
Well, okay, 10 points. And just for listeners out there, if you go to the Franklin Free Press Facebook page, and you'll see that we're doing a college football pick'em contest again this year. That's one of the games that you can pick in this week's contest. This week it's a $25 gift card to Domino's Pizza, so a pretty good haul if you end up our winner. So again, if you go to the Franklin Free Press Facebook page, you'll scroll down there, you'll see a link for the college football pick'em contest that we're doing at the paper, and make your picks for that. Clemson and Georgia Tech is, I believe, the first game on there. So, anyways, let's continue.
I would go Clemson if I were you. No, second game. I think this is an early game as well. I want to say it's another 11 o'clock kickoff. Oregon at Northwestern. Oregon is a 27.5 point favorite. I really like that line, especially with it being 27 and a hook instead of a full 28. I think Oregon certainly wins this game by 4 touchdowns or more. They love points. Northwestern doesn't really seem to like points. Northwestern is an abysmal football program. They have been for 5 years. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. And Oregon's going to score 70 if they can. And I like for them to easily cover 27.5. I know to some bettors it looks like a high number, but really, if you look back on the last 4 or 5 years, if you look at an Oregon line, you're hardly ever seeing a number that doesn't start with a 3. A 33-point favorite or a 34-point favorite. So to be getting 27 and a hook, I like Oregon to cover.
Whatever happened to Northwestern? Didn't they have like Pat Fitzgerald or whatever his name was, who was in there for a few years and they were all right, and then they just kind of tanked?
Yeah, Pat Fitzgerald had them playing relatively, okay football for a little while there, and then
Michael Wilbon was on campus every week for like 2 years.
Well, they had some kind of fiasco, some kind of situation. I can't remember exactly the details of it, but just a few years ago, the hammer got laid down on them for some allegations and things of like player misconduct and things like that. How the players were being treated, something of that nature. And ever since then, Northwestern has been a 1-11 program, and the one win is over like Portland State or somebody like that. So, I don't put any stock in Northwestern. It wouldn't be surprising to me if they get beat by 50 in this game.
All right, Luke, what's your third game?
This one's tough. Much like last week, I made a pick on Vanderbilt on the money line just for a little bit better odds situation, a little bit better payout. I'm kind of doing the same thing on this one. You can play it one of two ways. I've got Tennessee. They are at home against the Georgia Bulldogs. I understand it's the mighty Georgia Bulldogs, but that Tennessee team ain't too shabby themselves. You're getting plus 3.5 if you go spread, or you can go money line and up those odds. I want to say it's like a 185 dog for Tennessee, which would especially help you in a parlay payout if you got a 3 or 4 leg parlay there and just need some better odds. But I like for Tennessee to at least cover in this game. 3.5 seems like a lot in a game where I feel like two teams are extremely even, especially with Tennessee playing in Neyland Stadium. I didn't see a whole lot from Georgia in that game last week. Not to say they were going to show the entire playbook as they're playing North Texas or whatever. But I still think there's a lot of talent on both sides of the ball for both of these teams. I look for it to be a relatively low-scoring game, but I think Tennessee Give me the points and 3.5 there. Might even tease it up to 4 if you wanted to.
You think that's the game of the week, Tennessee, Georgia?
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll be the most competitive and the most exciting, and especially atmosphere-wise. Neyland Stadium's always rocking, especially when Tennessee's good, to which they are. Joe Aguilar's looked very good and comfortable as the starting quarterback there, which that guy brings a lot of experience. Of course, Georgia's going to be exactly what Georgia is under Kirby Smart. They're going to be competitive every game. For some reason, I just have this hunch. I think Tennessee. I think Tennessee pulls the upset, if you want to call it an upset here. I mean, they are the lower ranked team, so I guess by all intents and purposes, it is an upset. But I like Tennessee to actually win outright. So if I were going to play it, I would bet the money line simply for the better odds. But if you're not feeling that courageous, then plus 3.5 is not a bad play.
Sounds good. Luke, what's your next game?
Well, I guess I'm just trying to redeem myself from last week because
how did your Hawaii bet turn out?
That was a win. Yeah, that lock was locked. Yeah,
that was one of the 2 wins.
Yeah, somebody found the key to 3 of my picks last week, and unlocked them. But we don't have to get into that. I don't know who it was, but anyway, yeah. So Hawaii was one that did pan out for me.
I don't think anybody was awake to watch that either way.
I watched it. But no. So to redeem myself from last week, I picked against South Florida as they traveled to the Swamp to take on Florida. They were a 17.5-point dog. I picked Florida to cover as one of my locks. Not only did Florida not cover, they lost outright. So that's probably the most embarrassing pick I've made all year. But
it's still early.
It is early. South Florida is, again, ironically, a 17.5-point dog at Miami. Now, listen, South Florida's done something that I don't think a lot of people realize. When you see this game on paper, you think, well, Miami will just dog walk them. And, the average fan may believe that way. But South Florida has knocked off 2 consecutive top 25 teams. They're going in on the road against a 3rd consecutive top 25 team. And I like getting 17 in a hook. I mean, give me the Bulls. I'm a believer until they prove me wrong. I mean, well, I guess they did prove me wrong last week, but my point
that's
being,
why you're a believer now.
Yeah, that's why I'm a believer now. Exactly. I saw it with my eyes, and I also felt it in my pocketbook. So I like South Florida plus 17 in a hook. Do I think they outright beat Miami the way they did Florida? Not necessarily, but I like them to at least cover and be competitive. They got a good football team.
All right. Anything else you got for us, Luke?
I got one more pick.
Okay, one more pick.
Yeah, one more lock. Again, trying to redeem myself from last week, and this is actually the 3rd consecutive week that I've picked this team. Ole Miss is a 6.5-point favorite at home versus Arkansas. Arkansas looks to be improved from last year. Ole Miss, I'll say this, if you watched that game and how Ole Miss sort of had this debacle at the end of the game where they were covering, and you think you're a winner, and then Kentucky drives down with a minute to go and no timeouts.
And kicks a field goal.
And kicks I understand the idea behind it. You're down by 10, so you kick the field goal while there's time remaining so you can kick an onside, possibly recover, and then launch to the end zone, and you never know what's going to happen. So I get the strategy there. What I don't understand is you let them drive down. They have no timeouts. They're running no huddle. There's 11 seconds on the clock, and they're running no huddle to run another play. If they run another play and it's incomplete or whatever happens, the game's over. They're not going to kick a field goal there. They're just going to throw up another Hail Mary or whatever, and you got to avoid that. Instead, Lane Kiffin calls a timeout on defense. It's the most baffling thing. It's the worst way to lose. But he did apologize in his presser to everybody who bet the spread for Ole Miss. He apologized that I don't know if
he's not redeeming your losses.
No, he didn't. He didn't send me any reimbursement, but he did apologize. So I guess that counts for something. But I think him being aware that he cost many people money last week, that he will not want that to happen again this week. So I like getting Ole Miss at less than a touchdown in any game. To me, is a gift. Um, so I like the Rebels to redeem themselves, and Lane Kiffin to make up for his blunder last week, and make us some money this week. So Ole Miss -6.5 versus Arkansas.
All right. So Ole Miss wasn't quite the revenge game that we thought it was going to be last week, but you're pulling for the Rebs this week to make up for it this week. All right. Those were LA's locks of the week. What did you say your record was for this year?
Overall 6-4.
6-4. So hovering over 500. We're going to try to get into the 6 or 7s.
Well, I'd like to make a point to people who maybe only do this recreationally, which I only do it recreationally, but I would also like to say that the greatest sports bettors on earth only win 66% of the time. Those are the people who I'm talking about, the people who make legitimate, like, a living by being a professional gambler. They only win 66% of the time. So 6-4 is not a bad record.
So you're sitting at 60%. Sample size is still kind of small, but we got all year, and we'll see how it averages up at the end of the season. But those are LA's locks of the week for entertainment purposes only, of course. But Luke is going to join us in the next segment. We'll talk a little bit more college football. But we're going to go to a quick break. You've been listening to the Football Friday Tailgate Show here on WGOL. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Football Friday Tailgate Show. My name is Kadin Pounders, and I'm joined again in this segment by Luke L.A. Shepherd. Luke, we're going to talk a little bit more, get into a little bit more in depth on some of the college football action happening this weekend. You gave us your betting locks in the last segment, but me and you like to every once in a while get into the ringer with these teams and these games that are happening over the weekend. Unfortunately, I'm working all weekend. I won't be able to see very many of them, but there are some good games on the schedule. Luke, is there one that stands out to you want to talk about first?
Well, there's a few. I think if you like, really close competitive football games, then you'll wanna pay attention to Vanderbilt and South Carolina. I think Vanderbilt is a better football team than people probably realize. South Carolina obviously has done a good job this year. Shane Beamer has the trajectory for that team, on the upward side of things. As you've seen over the last few years, they've gotten progressively better. Lenore Sellers at quarterback, and he's playing extremely well. Diego Pavia at quarterback for Vanderbilt, obviously a dog, playing very well. I look for this to be a smash. I know this is kind of crazy to say, because nobody thinks of South Carolina and Vanderbilt being smash mouth football, but I actually can't wait to watch this game because I think it'll be extremely competitive, and I think it'll be very physical. I think it's all going to come down to who wins the line of scrimmage in this game, which kind of sounds like old school football, and you especially don't think about that when you think South Carolina and Vanderbilt. But these are two different programs entirely from historical standpoints. So, I don't really know that I have a team that I like. I think if I were leaning one way or another, I'd probably give the slight edge, much like Vegas has, to South Carolina. But again, this is one of those games that I think can go either way, and I think the fourth quarter will be quite telling. I look for it to be close pretty much the entire game, as long as neither team comes out, and just shoots themselves in the foot. As long as you see two teams that come and play clean football, you should see a really nice finish there in that game.
South Carolina going to that game ranked number 11 in the country. I think they were ranked number 13 the week before, so moved up 2 spots. I liked we watched that game, their first game against Virginia Tech. We watched that game together, and South Carolina, ended up being a pretty good game, but South Carolina looked really good at times. I think South Carolina, and before the season, I was looking at some of these quote-unquote experts' picks, preseason playoff picks and stuff, and they had South Carolina. I had 1 or 2 guys had South Carolina being their dark horse for a playoff spot this year, which, Georgia, if you go off based off what some people are saying early on this in the season, may not be as good as they have been in years past. I kind of want to wait a few more weeks before I make that decision. Um, I had a friend text me, says, "You got to convince me that Alabama's not going to beat Georgia this year." Well, let's wait and see what happens. But so Georgia, we'll wait and see what happens with them. But if they're down like some people think they will be, then South Carolina's got a really good shot of being that team that can step up. Florida is obviously, not looks like they're not going to be very competitive. You got Tennessee on that side, so it's probably South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia. Would you say?
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to remember too that the divisions are gone. Now there's no
That's right.
East and West, so it's just the two best conference records play one another, and which bodes well for South Carolina too. So because in years past, if you lost to Georgia, well then Georgia was they had to lose two games while you won out in order for you to make a berth into the SEC championship, and it's not quite that way anymore. But going off what you're saying, I agree with you. It's really hard to say early on whether Georgia's actually down, whether Florida's actually down. Florida losing South Florida, obviously that's a big black eye in week 2 or 3 or whatever we're in now. But it's not necessarily a recipe for what's going to happen with 10 more games to go. So, you got to be careful not to overreact there. But I think South Carolina has grown leaps and bounds to where they are a true competitor, to be an SEC championship caliber team. You gotta think just a year ago they were the last man out from the 12-team playoff, and some people were advocating that they had every right to be there. You know, over teams such as Boise State or SMU and things like that. So again, like you're saying, it's hard this early to tell. But games like South Carolina and Vanderbilt are games that are measuring stick games that show you, just what you've got. And you got to understand, I mean, at this point, the way we're talking about it, I mean, Vanderbilt's in the discussion as well. I mean, nobody wants to say that out loud, but it's the reality. They're 2-0 and they've not lost an SEC game because nobody's played an SEC game. So everybody's in first place, and we'll just, you just got to see how it pans out. But yeah, I think, absolutely, I think South Carolina's a contender.
Well, and you reminded me because I completely forgotten about the whole East West going away after Oklahoma and all these other teams jumped into the SEC and Texas. So that's also another thing. I can't sit here and say that I memorized every SEC team's schedule. So I don't know who South Carolina is playing further down the road. But if you're them, this Vanderbilt game, you're sitting at home thinking, well, it's Vandy, but it's an SEC game, and so that's a game you got to have, and because you're going to have tougher, tougher games down the road that are going to decide the season. So Vanderbilt's got to be one if you're South Carolina that you got to have in your back pocket already going into those games. Luke, is there another game on this schedule? I see your LSU Tigers are playing Florida this weekend in Death Valley. What do you think about that game?
I think, again, be careful not to overreact about what happened in the swamp last week with South Florida. That's a talented South Florida team, if you know ball. I think Florida will be very competitive in this football game. I'm going to be really, really honest with you. If LSU were to lose this football game to Florida, it wouldn't surprise me. It's still, I mean, there's still two very competitive football teams, two SEC teams. Again, Florida still controls their own destiny. They're in first place in the SEC, just like everybody else is right now. So, the game to South Florida in reality doesn't matter. What matters is what you do going forward, which is a very dangerous spot to be in if you're Brian Kelly and LSU because Florida has everything to gain from this, and you still do too at the same time. But now all of a sudden Florida has this target on their back. Their coaches, future is in jeopardy. It's in the air. There's a lot of motivational factors that go into Florida in this game. more so than for LSU, I think. So that's a dangerous place to be if you're the Bayou Bengals. But I like my LSU Tigers. I think they've got a very competitive, strong football team this year. I like for them to win the game, but it wouldn't surprise me if they end up losing this game, especially with Brian Kelly as the head coach.
Well, I think you know what I'm going to say next, which is you sound like Brian Kelly, hedging your bets.
Well, yeah, I
In
mean,
that game.
and he did it himself. We talked about that earlier this week, in the press conference where he says, I'm so appalled that Billy Napier would be on the hot seat. Well, the guy's 17-17. I mean,
Yeah,
why
at Florida.
in the SEC at Florida at a elite program? What do you mean you're surprised? You're not surprised. What you're saying is, if we end up crapping the bed on Saturday, then I can look back on 4 days ago and I can say, I was saying this is a great competitive football team, which they are, a talented competitive football team, but it's still a game that is inexcusable to lose, especially at LSU standard, and we all know that. It's the same thing as Alabama. You see the Alabama effect with Kevin DeBoer, and yes, Kevin DeBoer has lost games that he shouldn't have lost, right? Vanderbilt shouldn't have lost that game. Florida State, some would argue that he shouldn't have lost that game. I get it.
At least it should have been more competitive.
And maybe so, but the idea is that the expectation in the SEC is just different, and you don't get 5 years like Bear Bryant and those guys used to get. It doesn't exist. In a world where we have instant gratification at our fingertips and can look at every stat line as soon as the play's over. It's impossible to get out of that shadow sometimes. So, but not to be on a tangent there, I'm just saying I do agree with you that Brian Kelly somewhat was hedging his bet. It at least felt that way. But I think LSU will take care of business in this game. But again, don't think they're going to run away with it.
Well, for anyone watching the game with you, I hope that's the case, because it's a real pleasure to see you in front of a television watching your Bayou Bengals sometimes struggle mightily.
I don't know who finds that fun.
It's very entertaining.
I don't find it very fun at all. I find it very stressful and bad for my health. But I'm sure I'll be in that predicament on Saturday. Is that a 2:30 game?
It's a 6:30 game. So
it's a night game
in Death Valley.
Well, that's better. Yeah, that makes me feel a little bit better, But again, I probably won't feel okay until 0-0 and we have the lead.
All right, Luke.
In the fourth quarter.
I think we got time for maybe one or two more games to talk about. Which game kind of stands out to you? Any more games stand out to you?
Yeah, I want to point one out real quick, and people are going to probably think I'm a little bit crazy. I'm not saying go play this game, if you're a bettor or anything like that, but just wanted to keep your eye on if you just like watching ball. Is Ohio State and Ohio? I know that sounds really ridiculous, but the Ohio Bobcats are one of the better non P4 teams in college football. Beat West Virginia outright last week. Which I understand it's West Virginia, not Ohio State, but I think that's like a 30-point spread or something of that nature. Again, I'm not advocating that you should go and play it, but Ohio, I look for them to remain competitive in the football game. I don't think they lose by 5 touchdowns. That's just going to be my hot take for the week, is kind of what I'm getting at. But, I still think they lose the game. I think Ohio State, wins, obviously. But, I look for Ohio to give them a little more trouble than what people probably expect.
So cover the 29.5-point spread?
I think so, yeah. I'd probably move that. I'd probably buy it to 30. In games where I'm playing an underdog, I don't like a hook. I only like a hook when I'm playing a favorite, but that's just my prerogative. But I think just for fun, college football atmosphere type, like, is this going to be an upset? It's a little bit of a trap game. I don't think Ohio State will lose, but I think you'll find it to be a more competitive game than what you might think on paper.
All right, should we talk about Alabama, Wisconsin, just to close it out?
Well, I'm sure there's listeners who would like to hear what, maybe what we think. I don't know that they care what we think, but they probably want to hear about their favorite team.
Sure, and I don't even know who Auburn's playing this week. They're playing South Alabama, so Auburn's a 24.5 point favorite in that game at home. It's going to be on the SEC network.
I like Auburn to cover 24.5. Not that it matters, but just to dabble into this just a little bit. I think Hugh Freeze is one of those guys that in games like this, every point matters and the style points matter. And I think he needs big wins over these inferior opponents, just to help the resume a little bit. You can't, and I'll give you an example of why I say that. Because if you look at last week with Dabo Sweeney, there was already, there's already been in a couple of years of these kind of quiet whispers about his job security at Clemson, right?
Yeah,
because he has his biggest rival is the transfer portal, and so you hear those quiet whispers, and I think for Hugh Freeze, you're kind of almost on that same boat with him, and so you can't afford to have a struggle week like Clemson did against Troy, where it only heightens those concerns. And I think Hugh Freeze is in that similar situation. You can't afford to struggle against South Alabama, because then if you struggle against South Alabama, but then let's say you're very competitive against Georgia and you lose that game by 4 points, or you lose that game by 6 points, or whatever it may be, by one possession or something of that nature, I think it waters down how competitive you were in that game, because people are going to remember that we only beat South Alabama by 6, and so at that point it's you can't concretely solidify wins over the less competition. So I don't really care that you're competitive against the really good competition. Maybe they just played down to us.
yeah. Fair point. We're running out of time here, so let's
We'll
get to Alabama.
jump into Alabama real quick,
because we may end up going a little bit over than we should on that game too. Alabama, obviously the favorite. They're a 20.5 point favorite in this game at home in Tuscaloosa against the Wisconsin Badgers, a team they beat pretty handily last year at Wisconsin. This year it's at home for Alabama. Obviously, I was one of those people in week one who was not very impressed by Alabama. Came out last week, and I saw 2 or 3 plays of that game. I was one of the Ty Simpson. Admittedly, I won't say I was a hater.
You were an absolute hater.
Well, anyway,
I know what the conversation sounded like because you were having it with me.
Okay, well, I wasn't very impressed by Ty Simpson, but come out last week and it was a perfect 17 for 17 or something like that. Again, it was against
UL Monroe.
UL Monroe, so I take that with a grain of salt. But looked good last week. The offense looked good. Obviously, the defense. I think it was had a shutout in that game. But this is a game probably maybe more that you'd like to see a scoreline from like last year. I think it was like 35-6 or something like that. I think I'd like to see that. Would kind of give me more of an idea of like what this Alabama team is really going to do. Okay, we can say week one, it's first game of the season, new starting quarterback, playing against a Florida State team that did have, I think, 30 transfers in the portal this offseason.
7th best ranked roster by ESPN.
Yeah. So and I'm just saying that Alabama, and people say, "Oh, Ty Simpson, blah blah blah." The reason I wasn't really high on him was not that he didn't have a perfect game. It was the things I saw during the game, which was holding the ball in the pocket too long, not being able to throw on the run, not being able to make a decision over whether to throw the ball or run with it. I mean, that 4th down play was probably the biggest example. And there was a play after that where he skipped the ball, where he had a guy open, he skipped it to him, and you could have a first down on 3rd down. Well, so I'm just giving those examples. I know what you're gonna say.
I'm gonna advocate on his behalf for 1 second. All right, I think there's a tendency to magnify those 2 or 3 plays that obviously were blunders.
Had a perfect first drive. It's just everything after that was.
He should have run on the 4th down. I give you that. He should have run on the 4th down. He did skip a ball to an open receiver when you need a crucial first down right there. I understand those things happen, right? But as far as holding the ball too long, it's hard to throw to somebody who's not open. When you got 5 guys out on routes and you have an empty, you're coming in and empty. You don't have that added protection there from the back. So You can't. What do you want the guy to force a throw and throw an interception,
No,
or you want to take the sack?
no.
Because at some point you have to make a decision that not every play, is a positive play.
I know, but
or has the ability to be a positive play.
but it doesn't need to be a negative play. Is what I'm saying. He sits there and but he sits in the pocket, and you're back there forever and ever and ever, and you don't have anybody open. I know he's not Jalen Milroe, and he doesn't have that speed or athleticism, but he's not Tom Brady back there. He can run with the ball, or he get out of the pocket and throw it and live to fight another down. But he was just sitting back there forever, and then he got into a position where if he didn't run, he was going to get crushed, and by then they were already on him. You know what I'm saying? Like it just took too long to make a decision. Now
I think he heard everything you had to say, and that's why he went 17 of 17.
okay,
next week.
And hopefully against Wisconsin, better competition, he'll have a game like that.
As far as this game goes,
then I'll take back everything I said.
Okay, well, we'll see about that next week. But I'll say this about, and then we can wrap this up because I know we're going over a little bit. But Wisconsin at Alabama, I understand it's in Tuscaloosa. This is 11 a.m. kickoff on ABC. Wisconsin, a 20.5 point underdog. I'm going to lean. I'm not saying play it, do whatever you want to do. I'm going to lean Wisconsin with 20.5 points to play with. I think Alabama wins the football game. Obviously, but I don't see Alabama winning by 3.5 scores over a Big Ten opponent in the Badgers. So I like Wisconsin to at least keep it within 3 touchdowns.
All right, well,
that's my take.
Hopefully, as an Alabama fan, 4 touchdowns. Like I said, I want to see what they did. A similar scoreline to last year, win by 4 touchdowns, look decent doing it, and then have some confidence going in. I think they start SEC play next week. So, that's what I want to see from Alabama. Yes, like Luke said, we're kind of going over in this segment. We're going to wrap up the show right now. If you're going to not be able to make the Russellville game tonight, stay tuned on WGOL. Me and Ty Wells will have the call from Golden Tiger Stadium. But get out there if you can. If not, please stay tuned to WGOL, and you can listen to the Golden Tiger football action here. You've been listening to the Football Friday Tailgate Show. My name is Kadin Pounders with Luke Shepard. Thanks for listening, and we hope to catch you here next week.